Okay, thank you. And so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for attending this webinar today. And my name is Stan Trembach. I am currently an assistant professor at the School of Library and Information Management at Emporia State University. And I am really glad to have this opportunity to actually continue the SLIM research webinar series. And just a little bit about myself. At SLIM, I teach courses in the leadership and administration concentration, and specifically LI 805, Management in Information Organizations. So this focus on library management issues informs a lot of my research agenda as well. But the overarching theme of my scholarly interest is equity of information as it manifests itself in library resources and services. But in particular, and probably you've seen this from the webinar description, I study and I'm interested in how adaptive and culturally responsive leadership practices impact internal organizational effectiveness, as well as the quality of library services that we deliver to diverse populations. So today I will be talking about one of my current and actually ongoing research projects with the working title of Employability of Today's LIS Graduates from the Library Leadership Perspective. And from conversations with many of my students in management courses and community needs analysis courses, in reference and research methods courses, I have gotten a sense that this topic should be very much interesting to a lot of you as well. You know, both of you who are just entering the program and those who may be nearing graduation already. So, and this is true because, you know, after all, no matter how much we all enjoy being a part of the SLIM culture and community, no matter how much you may love learning and doing research while at school, the ultimate goal of everyone pursuing a college degree is what? You know, to get a job upon graduation, right? So essentially, in plain English, the nature of my current project can be summed up as, what does it take library school students to get a job upon graduation? Or what type of skills can we expect that will be required in today's volatile and ever-changing job market? So today I thought I would throw some light on my approach throughout this research project, and specifically to project design, just in case some of you may be interested in similar types of studies. I will first discuss what fueled my interest in this topic that is obviously not new to our profession by any means, what methods I chose to collect my data, and I will also touch upon some of the key findings of the project and maybe some of the limitations and also the possibilities for future research that I've been able to identify in the process. So, to project background, what prompted me to design this study in the first place? Well, by and large, it's just the fact that right now in the 21st century, and particularly in this day and age, a good way to characterize the time we live in would be to say that we are living in a time of change. And I would like to start off by sharing a quote by Marianne Williamson. And she's just an author that I'm a big fan of. And she said, "Change is in the air because old patterns are falling away and new energies are emerging." And I think this quote describes the state of librarianship today pretty well. And very briefly, the first type of change I'd like to talk about or draw your attention to is obviously advances in technology, because we have gone mobile and we have gone social. So two things here. And it certainly affects how information is perceived, how it's retrieved, how it's produced in the first place, then how it's disseminated and processed. And we as educators, as service providers, have to be part of this mainstream if we want to remain relevant. Another change we have to be mindful of is the growth of competency-based education, or learning, where you can take a relatively short course and then you get a certificate of completion or a badge of honor at the end. So also we cannot overlook rather the transition to open education resources. And this is very much true here at Emporia State, where the case is that we are being encouraged as faculty to adopt OER to help our students to reduce the cost of textbooks. And I can almost guarantee you that more faculty are going to know about open educational resources and use them in the future. And more in practical terms, one way this ongoing change is manifesting itself is through a rapid demographic shift in higher education. And you all have experienced it probably, because if you work in a library already, or if you are a library patron, you may have noticed this. On any given day, we may be interacting with students or with users, customers of 6 different generations, from baby boomers to millennials and Generation Z even. Plus, if you're in the academic library world, you may be dealing with first-generation students or other non-traditional students groups for whom education may be a second career option. So, circling back to my project, overall, it was developed on a premise that at the time of social and political turmoil, as well as less than stable economic climate, securing gainful employment is one of the primary concerns for the graduates of library and information science programs across the nation. And discussion on the skills and the expertise required or expected for contemporary library staff is emerging as a significant topic, a very important topic in library literature. And this has been a trend in recent years. So when I started to look at this emerging scholarship, what I saw was, I would say, a certain disconnect between theory and practice of librarianship. And what I mean here is, yes, there's a general agreement among scholars about the theoretical knowledge of the field that any aspiring LIS program graduate should possess. But at the same time, there's much less unanimity or consensus as to what practical skills newly minted information professionals will be required or expected to have in order to function successfully in their chosen area of profession. So furthermore, a complicating circumstance here is that librarianship is such a broad area of expertise. And one issue here is that with many potential career paths in front of you, which fall under this library and information services umbrella, there can be confusion and some unsure career paths for graduates of these relevant programs. So here's a problem, that a lot of the studies in the so-called skills scholarship, they do not quite provide a big picture view of the issue in this country specifically, because what I found is that these studies focus either on one specific function of librarianship, such as cataloging and classification, or maybe they focus on a subject area like health science librarianship. Well, there's also research, I have to admit, research that is based outside of the United States, and it presents wonderful case studies in regions like Australia or maybe Southeast Asia, but there's considerably less extensive body of scholarship covering American perspective. So in the meantime, in this country and in Kansas in particular, libraries face new problems and new challenges and new opportunities, quite honestly. And so expectations for new library employees are constantly evolving, because libraries have to make sure that they are able to identify and hire the most qualified applicants who can meet their needs. And yet there are quite few studies, I would say, not sufficient amount of studies examining the current library leadership perspective on the skills, on the qualifications and attributes of recent or soon to be MLS and MLIS program graduates, and much less whether those skills and attributes might have changed over time, and whether those skills and qualifications are required, preferred or desired, and also whether or not those required skills are associated with any kind of prior library experience. So to fill the existing gap in our knowledge, or rather, I would say to add to the ongoing conversation, my project specifically focuses on investigating the perceptions of information professionals employed in positions of leadership in libraries and maybe other information organizations regarding the skills and competencies that job applicants, like some of you guys, must possess in order to successfully perform the duties of their job. And specifically, I said at the onset of the project, I established my goal as to explore the leadership take on the importance of a combination of the so-called hard or technical skills, which may be directly related to the job description, and a much broader range of soft personal skills, interpersonal skills that are certainly expected of the 21st century information worker. So that is a bit of a background. This is my methodology. So because I wanted to achieve a better understanding of the needs and expectations of the target population, which is the library leadership right now, with regard to this relevant professional skills and competencies, I approached it with a survey design in mind. I built a brief survey which contained both close-ended and open-ended questions. And my goal was to achieve as wide of a coverage as possible with the survey. So I distributed it through the listserv of several regional professional library associations, including the Library Leadership and Management Association listserv, the LAMA, the MPLA listserv, the Pacific Northwest Library Association listserv, and also the Southeastern Library Association listserv, which actually includes all the states in the Southeast and goes as far west as, I think, Louisiana and Arkansas. And my intention from the get-go was to collect responses from library leaders willing and able to participate. That's kind of a self-selection mode, which could be one of the limitations of this research design. But for the purposes of the study, I only selected and focused on responses from individuals who had position titles like director, dean, or maybe head, or also librarians with some managerial duties, which resulted in a total of 194 qualified responses out of a pool of more than 300 in total, I think, that I received throughout the duration of the survey. And I specifically asked participants about their role within the library. And also I had questions focusing on their perception of the competencies that job applicants in their organization or in the library profession in general, if they were not currently looking to hire any new employees. So what competencies job applicants must possess in order to successfully perform the duties of their position. And once again, I just want to emphasize this point that my overall objective in launching this project was to kind of paint a comprehensive picture of the skill sets desired of potential employees in the library professions. So this way, I was able to identify relatively broad groups of skills that I wanted to focus on that are typically discussed in the literature in application to not just librarianship, but also various areas of business and industry as well. And those groups included soft skills like communication, teamwork, comfort with diverse cultures, etc. Also general technical skills like telecommunications and networking, website development, database management, etc., etc. Basic business skills, project management, and also information-specific skills, essentially those pertaining to information search and analysis or maybe knowledge management. So here's my findings. As I mentioned just now, I ended up with 194 respondents that met the study inclusion criteria, which was either a position of leadership within the library associated with job titles of deans, directors, or chair, or maybe a librarian with some sort of managerial duties in their daily responsibilities. And regarding the question of their current role within their information organization, I got an almost 50-50 split here between these two groups. There were also some respondents who identify as staff members with managerial duties, but this specific population was outside of the original scope of my research, so I did not actually include their responses in the final study, in the final analysis. And here I have to say that I purposefully sought to gather data from a diverse group of library leaders because I thought it would provide different perspectives from within information organization. And my other demographic question here had to deal with the specific library environment that my respondents were employed in, and over half of them indicated that they worked in an academic library, and actually more than 1/3 or 35% were employed in a public library setting. So this chart here, this table represents responses to the first set of survey questions, which had to deal with the soft skills the respondents thought were important for hiring decisions in their library. And I was particularly interested in these results because based on the literature, again, it was obvious that at this day and age, job market hopefuls, and not just in library professions, but in a larger domain like communications and even technical occupations, job market hopefuls are expected to possess a high level of these soft skills, including communication and organizational competencies. And I will include some references at the end that you can consult to learn more about those. Then also core behavioral skills like passion for learning, risk-taking, public service orientations, things that are generally hard to quantify, but that are nonetheless very, very essential. And of course, initiative taking and decision-making abilities. So as I just alluded to, these behavioral skills are the most loosely identified category that could mean a number of different things. They may refer to a broad spectrum of concepts like flexibility, adaptive leadership, enthusiasm about the job, etc. And if you extend this list even further, some sources imply that in today's highly globalized and actually competitive marketplace, new generation of librarians and information professionals have to be comfortable with diverse cultures from the standpoint of providing public services like maybe library instruction or other forms of assistance to multicultural audiences. So obviously a list of these skills can be quite extensive. So in order to keep the scope of my study somewhat manageable, I grouped them into these 7 subcategories. Well, communication, critical thinking and problem solving, entrepreneurship skills, ethics and professional moral skills, if you will, leadership, obviously lifelong learning and information management skills, and teamwork. And of course, as you see here from this slide, communication skills were considered very, very important by the highest percentage of the survey respondents. Over 91% chose this response, this categorization. But as you see, soft skills were deemed extremely important in general by all respondents, or the majority of the respondents across the board, regardless of their specialty within librarianship or maybe, and this is particularly true about critical thinking, lifelong learning, and teamwork. Okay, and I have to note here that although my survey respondents attributed seemingly less importance to entrepreneurial and professional ethics skills, I think the overall conclusion that I gathered was that soft skills are almost unanimously recognized as vital for MLS program graduates. And at times, these types of skills can even be more important than the primary skill sets required for the job. So here I also have another open-ended part of the question, which asked about any other soft skills that wouldn't be evident from these broad categories or groups. And in answering the open-ended question, the survey respondents, the most commonly mentioned skills that they referred to was a potential employee's ability to work with others and especially serve customers with diverse background, diverse knowledge, and levels of proficiency with information resources. So what we conclude from these results is that library and information service employees are certainly required to have adequate and proficient teamwork skills to successfully fulfill the requirements and expectations of their potential employers and clientele alike. And there was a wide array of responses to my open-ended question, but if you ask me to summarize those responses in one sentence, the theme of most of those observations would be working with others, which confirms the findings from other research, such as a study recently done by Coe and Abbas, I think it was in 2015, that emphasized a trend in contemporary libraries to go away from the traditional hierarchical top to bottom organizational model. And instead, we are witnessing a move towards more of a flat organizational structure. And when you no longer have this straight line vertical structure, and you no longer have this clear chain of command, the success of your organization will very much depend on the team working abilities of your staff. And those of you who may have taken or will be taking my management courses will hear me talk about this topic over and over again, so bear with me here. But overall, the survey respondents, with regards to the soft skills, they put a particular emphasis on hiring well-rounded, qualified individuals who demonstrate solid oral and written communication skills, as well as ability to think critically and develop new ideas and tackle challenges in various job-related scenarios, which is quite expected, I would say. Now, on the subject of hard or technical skills, it was another major category in my survey, and I wanted to look at those because technology is one area where the demand for skilled professionals has been particularly evident for a number of years, if not decades, I would say. And when we talk about change in the library professions that I started my presentation with, advancements in technology are usually one of the top factors that influence change that come to mind, and also, of course, the impact of COVID-19 currently. So I really wanted to evaluate the respondents' take on the importance of technical skills in a closed-ended questions. And then they were able to add their own thoughts as part of the open-ended question component. And so the specific technical skills or areas of expertise I selected for inclusion in the survey were more or less general skills that most professionals in the information industry, and I'm using this in the broadest sense of the term, general skills that they may be required to have. And these skills that I wanted to focus on included telecommunication and networking, data warehousing, knowledge management, web design, and application development, maybe some scripting tools, proficiency working with operating systems, object-oriented programming languages and techniques, visually based programming tools, database management, and enterprise resource planning tools. So overall, it was interesting for me to look at the results of this question because quite a few of the specific technical skills that I asked about, they were ranked as not quite important, or I would say somewhat important, by the survey respondents. And here in this table, the main technical skills that the majority of them deemed as important was knowledge management, in fact, which we could interpret in many ways. But one thing I think it's indicative of is the growing role of libraries and information organizations as knowledge producers, as knowledge facilitators and distributors. Then the open-ended question, focusing on the technical skills, allowed the respondents to list any other competencies that they believed were important for potential employees. And here I noticed an interesting trend as well, because guess what? The top desirable skill mentioned in those open-ended responses was knowledge about Canvas, right? Our learning management platform. In fact, out of, I think, 161 respondents that chose to answer that question and not skip that, 26 of them mentioned the knowledge and expertise with the Canvas platform as an important technical skill that they would like potential employees to have. And I think two factors may be at play here. Well, number one, if you remember, I think the majority of my respondents came from the academic library world, where Canvas is obviously widely used right now. And secondly, it may be possible to connect this rather high response rate to the effect of the COVID pandemic on library work. Because Canvas is a learning management system that has been in existence for quite a while, and it was available prior to COVID-19, but certainly in recent years, it has become much more widespread in more educational settings after the pandemic as well. And the conclusion here is that as our post-pandemic world continues to change and technology transforms it to fit our needs, learning management and also online communication platforms like Zoom will continue to be utilized so that you guys, soon to be program graduates and also current library and information service employees should keep their level of proficiency with these tools relatively high. And of course, one other commonality that I noticed in the responses to the open-ended and close-ended questions here on the technology skills was a pretty wide discrepancy in the rankings of the expected proficiencies pertaining to specific technologies. And this is because I think my participants had differing levels of needs for those in their respective work environments. What I mean by that is larger libraries or businesses usually tend to have a designated IT department that kind of deals with those major network security issues and the more, hardcore programming things perhaps. Well, on the other hand, if you happen to be a solo librarian in a small rural library settings, for example, you can expect to be responsible for everything from maintaining your web pages to providing tech support for electronic resources, collections, and databases, and actually managing the whole cycle of information from acquisitions all the way to deaccessioning. So that's why those responses could hardly be generalizable. Now, to the question of information resources and service management skills, that was another area that I categorized as more general to professional positions within the realm of information and communication technologies. But I decided to include this question in the survey to rank more library and information service specific technical skills that are often required of people entering our field. And those skills were such as copyright and intellectual property and compliance, managing the full life cycle of information, as I alluded to, like organizing and categorizing information, negotiating the purchase and licensing agreements, developing information policy or participating in policy development for the organization, conducting market research to identify some of the possible innovations and solutions for our customers, and then assessment, using matrix to improve quality and value of information services that we provide. And I think a brief summary is that the noteworthy in this category was the respondents' kind of collective take or collective opinion on the importance of copyright and intellectual property and managing the full life cycle of information skills from production to dissemination, which once again speaks to the expanding role of libraries as stewards of information resources and also active service providers. And other skills in my list were rated as less important, which again, I tend to attribute to the fact that they pertain to the relatively narrow and kind of specific areas of library operations that may not have been equally relevant to all of my survey respondents. But like other questions within the survey, this question or this topic area was followed by its open-ended counterpart, where the respondents were asked to share their thoughts about specific technical skills that they prefer or require of new and incoming employees that were related to information resources management. And once again, all of these extended responses varied, but a large proportion of responses, over 25% of respondents, I think, mentioned social media development and management, as well as knowledge of assessment software and strategies. And this is not accidental at all, because this finding about social media in particular, it resonates with many, many recent studies that demonstrate how libraries can and should use social media platforms to highlight their services and programs and communicate to a wider range of constituencies, particularly those that may be outside the spectrum of traditional library and information services. So it's often expected that library and information science program graduates would have a thorough understanding and, when applicable, some practical ability to maintain an active library social media presence. Now, to something that has been on our minds for the last 3 years, I would say, the impact of the COVID pandemic. And this is one more survey question, and maybe one of the final survey questions that I would like to highlight today, because I really wanted to collect the participants' opinions regarding the COVID impact on the skills, not on the library operations, but rather on the skills that they wished the potential employers would have, or once again, the skills that they deemed necessary within the library and information service environment. And as you see, in the wake of the pandemic, as we're recovering from it, my survey respondents appear to be more concerned about their ability to find candidates who possess the requisite array of soft skills as opposed to hard technical skills. Most respondents were just somewhat concerned or slightly concerned about the presence of the desired technical skills. And I think the reason may be that those may not have been so easily interrupted by the global pandemic. And this is quite an anticipated result in my mind, because the COVID-related disruptions and that period of social isolation that we all experienced in early 2020 kind of had a profound effect on our ability and sometimes willingness to socialize with others and respond in proper ways in social situations. But not only that, another factor here may have been that COVID caused some major disruptions in learning for our students of all ages and all academic standings, in fact, which certainly impacted their skill levels, soft skill levels relevant to our customer-oriented profession. So in the open-ended portion of this question, the survey respondents, they were able to elaborate more on their concerns with regard to the COVID impact. And one common thing in this qualitative responses was that initially, as we all remember, COVID posed many scheduling issues, right? Due to facilities being closed for extended periods of time, or maybe operating on reduced schedules. And as a result, many libraries were left with vacancies unfilled and sometimes little or no candidates to fill those positions. So the whole job market kind of sagged at that time. Also, as we vividly remember right now, there were considerable health and safety concerns, right? And other constraints that also played a role in limiting library ability to find suitable candidates. But still, the overall message from the responses to this question is that our profession, as well as society at large, is on the path to recovery, so that the impact of COVID, the general impact, appeared to have dissipated somewhat over time. So, what conclusions can we draw from this study, or what have I been able to draw here? Well, in my opinion, I got yet another proof that librarianship is a very, very dynamic and ever-evolving field. The technology is changing rapidly, and the needs of students and community members, our service communities, change. So the library and information services industry must also evolve and respond accordingly. And so the expectations placed upon newly minted library and information professionals include many, many different roles and skill sets. And those seeking a career in this field can go into many different career paths, obviously. If you are graduating with an MLS or MLIS degree, you can seek employment as a school librarian, maybe a public librarian, academic librarian, business analyst, database manager, information officer, and this list can go on and on. And in fact, if you're curious, you can consult resources like Library and Information Science Degree Center Opportunities. They had a publication as recent as 2022, where you can learn about a whole array of possible occupations. But one thing is clear to me is that while library and information science students are working towards their respective degrees, there is a quite palpable level of uncertainty and sometimes anxiety that a lot of them are likely facing. Well, you know, in the current volatile, unstable job market, it is perfectly natural and it's okay to experience this uncertainty and even anxiety about the future. But one of the takeaways from this research for current students in particular is that there are so many different career options that are available to you, to library and information science program graduates. So it then becomes imperative that you develop your strengths and kind of work on your areas of growth or weaknesses. And at the same time, it is imperative that you carefully evaluate the general job market outlook, as well as each position you may be interested in individually, and that you do plenty of research before actually going ahead and committing to one career trajectory or another. Speaking of limitless possibilities here. So, as far as some potential directions for future research, I think that this study suggested to me that there are several lines of investigation, in fact, that could be followed for us to become even more mindful of the demands and expectations that the profession itself places on the graduates of MLS and MLIS programs. Well, first of all, the practical implication and application of this study is that the information world is rapidly changing, right? And so are the needs and the expectations of the workforce. That is an established fact, I would say. What follows is that LIS curricula must evolve accordingly so that students can stay on top of the current trends and developments in the profession. So in relation to this, I would say that further research would be beneficial to understand how my specific findings from this study could be integrated into the practical curriculum, not only here at SLIM, but perhaps nationwide in a wider range of library schools and iSchools. And I have to say, one of the studies I consulted, you can look at the results of a survey from practicing librarians and library leaders as a wish list of sorts, a wish list from the profession. But how can it find its way into what we teach and learn in library schools? How can we best achieve this integration and still keep the balance between maybe some new pedagogical approaches that may be required to do so and the existing program goals and institutional goals. Well, another thing that comes to mind as far as potential research direction is that such curricular modifications that I mentioned just now may require a more regular and I would say more intentional collaboration between LIS faculty and practitioners, practicing librarians in the field. Are there successful instances of such collaboration, especially now that a lot of LIS programs and in fact a lot of library services are being delivered in fully or partially online formats? So that would be interesting to look at as well. Also, it may be an obvious conclusion, but I would say more innovative pedagogical approaches may be necessary to make sure that LIS students, MLS students, get a chance to actually learn and practice these skills while they're still in the program, or at least they get a chance to get some exposure to the demands of the job market. And fortunately, we are already taking a lot of these steps here at SLIM, such as perhaps moving away from the traditional lecture discussion board format alone. And we are trying very, very hard to engage students in project-based and experiential learning, where you guys get a chance to step outside of the physical classroom and maybe virtual classroom and actually create some products like you do in your capstone courses that you're able to showcase to potential employers. But can we move just a step further within this engaged learning paradigm? And finally, I feel like the study creates a foundation for answering a lot of these questions. And this foundation rests in perhaps continuing the current research with a more focused scope. And one possibility that I thought about just recently is to conduct a separate investigation of the needs of the leadership in public libraries, special libraries, academic libraries, or maybe a subset of those, such as research university libraries, for example, or on the other hand, libraries serving regional, smaller, comprehensive institutions. Also, as you get a sense now, hopefully, that the scope of the current study was limited to just the leadership perspective. That was intentional, and that was the purpose of research. But what about library staff, who may have a completely different perspective on those skills and qualifications that their colleagues may need in the current information environment? Once again, as is the case with your career opportunities, this list of possible research directions can go on and on. But overall, I would conclude that this right now is an exciting time for both our field, practical field, and those of us who are interested in doing research in this field. So I think with this, I will probably conclude my presentation. Here is a list of a very selected, very few resources that I've mentioned parenthetically as we spoke, and that I used in my research and that you may be interested in as well. Thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to discuss any questions that you might have. And please, if you have a question, make sure you unmute yourself and or put your questions in the chat. I am able to see the chat window right now.
I'm waiting to see if the students are jumping in with questions, Dr. Trembach. And if not, I have a question for you. Well, thank you for your presentation, which is extremely interesting, certainly for the academics, for the teachers in the room. But the perennial question is always, as you add more things to the curriculum, what can we take out of the curriculum so that we're not trying to do a 60, 70-hour program? Because it's always very easy to add things, or there are more things we need to do. But what can we take out? Because there is a finite amount of time we have. And no matter how innovative you are, there are limits to how much you can successfully teach or encourage students to experience within each class. So do you have any ideas as to how we manage this? Or are we simply saying we're supposed to add this on top of library knowledge as well? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for this question or observation, Dr. Smith. I think this is a wonderful point. And in fact, I would say you have just suggested another very exciting area of potential research, which is curriculum analysis of current LIS, MLS programs. I would say yes. Obviously, we do not want to overwhelm our students with 52 million things that we expect them to learn in a very finite amount of time that they have with us, because they already have their hands full, as we assume, and as we actually know for a fact, having to split their time between studies, jobs, family responsibilities, and so on and so forth. So I think, to answer your question, definitely some curriculum modifications would be desired and highly recommended if we were to incorporate all these changes and the recent trends that we are observing in the profession and that we're hearing directly about from the practitioner world. And what can go, or what can be merged and condensed, I would say, for lack of a better idea right now, is maybe some of the amount of time and attention we spend teaching and talking about print resources, right? Of course, we cannot really depart too far from the foundations of the professions, the principles of librarianship that our work rests upon, right? So we have to make sure that these are featured prominently in what we teach and what we learn. However, a print book is not the same type of, or the significance of a print resource is not the same as it might have been some 50 or 60 years ago, prior to the emergence of these technology assisted or enabled learning formats rather. So this is one opportunity, but for me, it's not, the question is not necessarily about taking something completely away from the curriculum, because as you know, it's always easy to wipe something out completely, but can you build it back up from ground zero? That's the thing. The question is more about how we can condense the things that may be related in the curriculum under one bigger umbrella, so that we can thus devote a due amount of attention to all of them at once without sacrificing the quality of our teaching and without jeopardizing students' mental and physical health and sanity, perhaps. Does it answer your question? I would, yeah, this is just an initial thought, but this is certainly something that deserves our attention in the long run.
It was really rather wicked of, it's really rather wicked of me to ask that question, because it's not an easy question at all, as you know. And I did laugh slightly at your comment about print resources, simply because, we've been told for the last 20, 30 years now that print is dead and libraries aren't going to have books anymore, which is so patently false. I mean, it would be a lovely idea in some ways, but it simply has not proved to be true for a whole host of reasons. But just this idea that we can sort of magically wave a wand and we can compress things and we can do away with other things and introduce this new content. And it really, I think there's a stage almost before that. So why are the library directors talking about the importance of soft skills? And is it because those are skills that have in fact vanished from so much of the rest of education, that skills that we could expect students to have from elementary school, high school, undergraduate coming into a graduate program have vanished from there. And so the reason people are telling us your students need to be able to do X is not the emergence of some new need as such, but the vanishing of where that formerly was taught. And so we're now being asked, I mean, in the same way we're being asked to do an incredible amount of teaching of basic writing skills, that some of which I look and say, this is elementary school work. You know, what is a sentence? How to write a topic sentence for your paragraph. But that is seemingly no longer being taught. So to what extent is that part of the problem? So it's not so much that we wicked librarians have been neglecting the needs of our students or of the public, but that we are now in a place where we're the last educational experience before our students are hitting the job market. And we're now being asked to make up for a lot of the educational experiences that are no longer where they formerly were. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is another excellent point. And in fact, it raises a broader concern once again, or a question, which is about how much is it humanly possible to learn, and what is a reasonable expectation that we can place on the MLIS program graduates. But above all, I think your questions and comments, Dr. Smith, they bring to light the fact that librarianship is a people's profession, right? It's a service profession, and that is why I think the perception of library leadership is that the so-called soft skills are just as important, if not more important, than the technical skills, because you can up the level of competencies with technology, right? These skills are easier to be learned compared to the soft skills. And also the diversity of users, the diversity of clientele we have to interact with on a daily basis in the professional world. Not only that, but also the diversity that we are observing within organizations. So I think this kind of explains the trend to place a higher importance on the soft skills compared to technical skills. But once again, as I alluded to in the slide about the possible directions for future research, I think it's not a panacea, but a step in the right direction could be enhancing collaboration between LIS faculty and the library world on the other hand, on the other side of the equation. And not only that, not only LIS faculty, I would say between the entire realm of higher education and in libraries as community institutions, I would say, because this collaboration can help us become more aware of what is needed from our students, what they will experience as they step out of the school and as they enter the professional world. What are the real life demands, and also why such skills as soft skills, communication, teamwork, DEI awareness, you name it, why such skills at this particular day and age, why they take precedence over maybe some of the more traditional hard technical skills. So collaboration and a comprehensive approach may be a step in the right direction. And I say maybe because certainly I am not in the position right now to profess that I know the truth here. So it's a work in progress, as everything in our field, and it's developing areas of research and practice. All right, let's see. Do we have any other questions, comments from anybody?
There are comments in the chat, Dr.
There are some comments in the chat. All right, let's see. Thank you for that. This has been so interesting. I appreciate it. So yeah, if you would like to discuss more the findings of this project or potential research directions, feel free to contact me and I will be happy to talk. Then another comment is that in terms of DEI or in terms of grammar, I'm not sure we can get nostalgic about a time when teaching certain skills hadn't vanished. Absolutely true. And another comment here is that I've always struggled with how or whether to present soft skills in job applications. There seem to be very strong feelings either way, including or excluding. Obviously, there is interest in them. Yes, this could be a wonderful topic for another conversation. I don't know if we have time for that, but I can tell you that my SLIM colleagues and we are planning an enrichment session in the near future, which will be dedicated exclusively to career-related issues and discussions with LIS, and where the floor will be given to you as students. Very briefly, my thought on this is that it is okay to highlight these skills in a sentence or two in your resume, but you will have a chance to shine when you go for a job interview, whether it's virtual or physical interview. So you can try doing your best and take full advantage of these opportunities, but usually these skills or lack of these skills becomes more or less apparent once we engage in a real communication with the person. Elementary teacher here. Just wanted to say that the skills that are being taught in schools, but students are so far behind, and the demands of home media and extracurricular activities and parent responsibilities have made it more difficult to get the students up to grade level. Absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely true. So like I said, it might take a concerted effort of everybody involved, not only LIS educators, but educators in general, and maybe starting earlier from elementary school level, perhaps. So how to establish this collaboration, how to start those conversations is maybe a topic for another discussion, though. But excellent questions. How do you quantify soft skills? I'm not sure there's a way to do that. And yeah, that would be great. Thank you. So thank you very much for your questions and comments in the chat. I see that the time is now 2 p.m. And once again, we only have limited opportunities for discussion in this forum. But if you would like to continue this conversation, I would be more than happy to engage in it. So feel free to reach out. Thank you.